Joining us now, the managing editor of the Lions Wire and Draft Wire, our good friend. You find him on the air on the west side of the state, 96.1 WMAX in Grand Rapids. His name is Jeff Risdon. He's doing a lot of radio today on Twitter. Jeff Risdon. Jeff, my man, good morning to you. How are you? How's life? How are things, partner?
It's very good. You're kicking off a day of 7 radio appearances today, so congratulations.
Hey, you know what? We're coming out swinging. You're coming out swinging with us, though. That's what we appreciate. Most importantly, how the kids doing?
It's been a great season. My daughter's basketball ended last night. My son's basketball ended in the district final last Friday night. It was wonderful to get to watch them both play, and we're kind of glad that the season's over because now we get to see our kids for a little bit.
Yeah, And can both of them drive, or are you still the taxi service at this point?
Oldest one can drive, but youngest one is still under the taxi service. She's a freshman. So had a great year, though, playing varsity. Started every game for Zeeland East. We lost last night to Zeeland West, but life goes on.
It's a beautiful thing. We're actually just talking about sports and the opportunities that sports provide. And, for some of us, it's the athletic competition, it's the learning experience, it's everything else. For a small select few, it might lead to a free education, which may, in fact, lead us to what we're going to talk about today, which is the NFL draft and turning a passion to play a sport into a career that can net you a large lump sum of cash. When you look at this NFL Combine, Jeff, what was maybe, or who were maybe, a couple of players that really stood out to you that improved their stock this past weekend?
I think you have to start. I mean, there's so many places, but obviously Xavier Worthy, the wide receiver from Texas, who is the fastest man ever at the Combine, running a 4.21 40-yard dash. The 10-yard split on that was 1.43 seconds, which is instantaneous acceleration. He's a guy. So he's in the Jamison Williams mold of receiver. He goes down the field, runs really fast, and mostly catches the ball, but doesn't always. But this is a guy who was probably a second, maybe a third-round pick, and now you're going to see some mocks where he's going to be in the first round, and it's not absurd to think when you've got that rare of a speed, it doesn't matter if you can catch the ball off that well because you're impacting the defense in other ways, much in the way that Jameson has for Detroit, and J-Mo finally has figured out how to catch the ball. And the hope will be that Xavier Worthy, all 165 pounds of him, will be able to do that. I'm skeptical if it didn't come across already, but he's a guy that certainly helped himself. There's a few other guys. I think Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo, we all knew he was good, but comparatively athletically, he put himself on another plateau. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he's the first cornerback taken. And it's not out of the question that he's the first defensive player taken overall. He is that good. He has incredible skills. As you know, I'm an Ohio Bobcat and a proud one. And I got to interview him down in Mobile. And Quinyon, I was wearing an Ohio Bobcats hat. And he came up to me as we're greeting and meeting for the interview. And he's like, "Oh, Ohio, sorry we beat y'all, bleep," and said it with a smile. That's the kind of edge I want in my quarterback on the outside. So, Lions fans are unfortunately not going to get a chance to draft him because he's going to be long gone. But he's a guy that has answered every question along the way and has certainly helped himself a lot throughout the draft process.
And for Quinyon, a guy that I got a lot of time to watch at the University of Toledo, he's just 100% all American kid. You know what I mean? He is just one of those young guys that comes out and you know that he's special. He had plenty of offers in the NIL portal to go other places, wanted to stick it out at Toledo and finish his career there. Then there were questions, could he compete with the big dogs? And him and Roman Wilson going head-to-head at the Senior Bowl, which obviously, you're down there to see how he competed against some of those bigger name schools. And he's that whoever drafts him is not only getting a quality player, but a quality human. So congrats to him. He'd be probably, I think, the highest Toledo Rocket selected ever if he can get inside that top 15. Now, Jeff, when we look at our Detroit Lions, which way would you lean for this team after seeing the Combine, after going to the Senior Bowl? Is there a guy out there that's sticking out that we might see if Brad Holmes, let's just say we stay put at 29, we don't move up, we don't move out. If we're there at 29, is there somebody that you really like this team to draft and why?
So there's a couple of guys, and that's the thing when you get to 29, you got to keep your options a little bit more open than you do when you're picking at 2 or 6 or 12 or whatever. Because it's really hard to predict who will be there. I'll tell you the guys that I would love, And I don't know if the Lions feel the same way, but Cooper Beebe, the offensive lineman from Kansas State, he's phenomenal. He is ready to start right away at either guard spot, depending on which openings there are. He played left tackle. He was the guy. 7 different players who were pass rushers were asked who the best player that they faced was. They all said Cooper Beebe. Like, he doesn't get a lot of love in draft circles or whatever because he's not an exceptional athlete. He's just really, really good at what he does. And is instant plug and play, and probably is better right away than either of the guards that the Lions started last year. By the way, both those guys are pretty good. I'm very bullish on him. You see a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry, he didn't get to work out down there. He's a cornerback that certainly fits the profile, but coming off of a weird injury, it's called a Jones fracture, which is basically where your pinky toe attaches to the rest of your foot. It's not a terribly uncommon injury. Johnny Newton from Illinois is another guy that I would absolutely love, but unfortunately won't be there. Defensive tackle, for my money, he reminds me so much of Gerald McCoy. And he would be a dream pick, but I don't think he's going to last. But he's a good one. My goodness. Darius Robinson, Detroit native, Canton High School. Missouri defensive end, did very well for himself. Talked up, the Detroit roots. Talked up wanting to play for Dan Campbell. He's an interesting fit in that he's 285 pounds as a stand-up pass rusher. But he can also move from the inside to the outside. There's some positional line versatility with him. The Lions certainly covet that. You see that in guys with Kaminsky and Pascal and even Hutch. They can move all over the line. He's another guy that can do that. He's in play, I would have to think, and I like his game a lot. I'm not sure that he's going to be the prodigious sack master in the NFL that some of the other guys might be, but he's a really, really good football player who fits. And I think that's where we have to scale our expectations. There's some names that are out there that are sexy and sizzle, but they don't really fit the Lions and what they're looking for. And I think those guys all fit what we're looking for.
By the way, Johnny Newton, Jerjon Newton, his brother, Jawan Newton, was a wide receiver at the University of Toledo, finished up his 5th year this past year. So just more MAC ties, right? Because we want to get some MAC shit out here, Jeff. I love that.
Always promote the MAC.
Yes, sir. We love that. And speaking of MAC guys, there is a player out of Western Michigan, Marshawn Nealon, that a lot of people are pretty high on. They like him a lot, the defensive end.
Oh, 100%. He is one of the big winners of the Combine, and he is the guy that the Lions certainly have on their radar. And he would be a guy that if you take a cornerback or an offensive lineman in the first round, you would come back in the second round and hope that he's there to address your pass rush need because he's a great fit. People can look at it at his relatively paltry numbers from sacks, but the guy who played most of last year hurt. Did not have a lot of help because this guy, Braden Fisk, he transferred down to Florida State and made himself into a first-round pick, potentially in the Combine in the postseason as well. Didn't play on a very good Western team. It wasn't their best season, certainly not defensively. So he's a guy that's a little bit under the radar, but I think the athletic display that he put on down in Indianapolis has opened a lot of eyes, and he's another guy, great fit for Detroit. He fits the grit, as we like to say.
We love to get gritty. Speaking of the Lions, from a philosophical standpoint here, Jeff, and I feel like we kind of know with Brad Holmes what they're going to do. They are going to take their best player available on their board, and they'll figure it out and how to make it work. And it's such a constant juggle, drafting for need, drafting for best available on your board, but also in free agency. There was a deal that was signed yesterday in Tampa Bay. How do you feel like Mike Evans, if at all, him sort of, quote-unquote, setting the market, which I don't know if that necessarily applies because of the longevity of his career already and the fact that he's never had a sub-1,000-yard season in his career, which is just mind-blowing to me. But does that set the table for the wide receiver market, and then where does Amon-Ra St. Brown fit into that picture?
Yeah, I think you're right about Mike Evans just being sort of on his own because he's been around. He was in the 2014 draft, has been over 1,000 yards. This guy's a Hall of Famer and a pretty solid Hall of Famer at that. I don't think a lot of people think of him that way. He has put up incredible numbers over the years. His is much more of a longevity thing. I think you're looking at he's almost being rewarded for what he's done. Whereas if you're paying Amon-Ra, you're paying him Yeah, he's done great so far, but you're kind of expecting him to keep doing that. And I don't think that's true with Evans. So I think you're going to see Amon-Ra get a little bit more just because he's starting to hit that athletic prime. He is that integral to the team. He's the number one wide receiver on one of the number one offenses in the NFL. That's going to get him paid in the – there's all sorts of numbers about that. I think it's going to wind up being about $27.5 to $29 million a year. I might be a little high on that, but I'll tell you, one of the takeaways that we got from the Combine last week, and speaking as the collective media, was that the teams are much more interested in keeping and rewarding their own than they are shopping on the outside, and Detroit is one of those. They've got a lot more money to spend with that big bump in the salary cap, and expect a lot of that to go to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that could happen very soon. Free agency does start next Wednesday. You can start talking to people on Monday for the team's illegal tampering period. He's under contract, so they don't have to get anything done this year. But I know they'd like to have that done so they know what their budget is when they do go shopping on the outside. And so expect that to be done. Expect it to be numbers that some people are going to be like, wow, we're paying him that much. But, yeah, that's the going rate for an all-pro wide receiver. You got to keep a guy like Amon-Ra happy. So
yeah,
they don't have a lot of choice there.
I'm 100% on board with that. Plus, the way that I was doing, like with some of those early numbers, like the $25 million a year over 3 years. And then so what I did is I took the total math of his contract that he had already made, added the additional 3 years at $25 million apiece. So you get 6 years on an average of $13 million and change for all pro performance. I think that's incredible. Now, I know that you can't retroactively well, yeah, first 3 years. Well, I mean, look, the guy has performed. I think he's a must keep. Like I think he's one of the franchise cornerstones, along with Panay, along with Aiden Hutchinson. I think we're seeing the birth of that with Sam Laporta, Brian Branch. I think that there are guys that you just cannot afford to not re-sign. And there might be even, a little bit of availability because they see the success that they're having and what this means to the city. Do you think that there's any, I know we refer to it as a hometown discount, but I think more often than not, it's the realization like Dak Prescott's going to go through. I might have to take a little bit less so that we collectively can go a little bit further.
Yeah, and that's certainly part of the equation, and I do think that, and this also plays into Jared Goff, if he's going to get an extension or not, and that's a good question that I unfortunately can't answer. I don't think anybody can answer that at this point, but the idea of keeping the core, when you're making $24 million a year, is it that important to you to make $27 million instead of $24 million? How much bigger can your boat be? Is the basic question that you have to ask yourself. And for some guys, I dealt with this with Odell Beckham Jr. back when he was in Cleveland. Like, he wants the bigger boat. Amon-Ra doesn't strike me as the guy who needs the bigger boat. So I do think that there's some give and take. And they can also structure the deal where the Lions are masters at adding void years onto it, which means that you're going to sign a 3-year contract, but it's going to get paid out over 5 years, or the cap hit gets amortized over 5 years. They love doing that, and I think that's a way to maybe fluff up the money a little bit without making it so punitive that they can't also sign other people, because they will run into that at some point. When you have to keep all this homegrown talent, you rattle the guys off. That means that you do have to actually pay these guys. Otherwise, you become the Washington Redskins back in the day, or the Tennessee Titans back in the Jeff Fisher era, where they had all these good guys and they had to let them go. That's not what the Lions are all about. They're about rewarding their own. So they will find ways to keep them, but it might require a little bit of creative contract work and agreements from the players to let that slide. But make no mistake, they will get paid.
Jeff, is there and by the way, I can't express my appreciation for you enough for joining us this morning on such a busy day for you. But when you look at this, team, right, and then you go back to what you saw in the Combine, is there somebody lurking there late that our Lions fans should be aware of, or maybe there's a couple of names that you're like, hey, this guy, regardless of position, stood out to you that might be one of those later picks? We have 4 in the top 100. Maybe he's that 4th pick, or maybe there's a selection a little bit later on that you really, really like that you've seen throughout the Senior Bowl of the Combine that might be one of the later guys that we're not hung up on at pick 29 or one of our, our second-round selection?
Yeah, there's a couple of them that come to mind. Malik Washington, wide receiver from Virginia, formerly at Northwestern, 4-time academic all-conference, 2-time team captain. He was elected a team captain at Virginia 3 weeks after he got on campus. That's how positive this guy. You know Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell love the football guys, the smart guys. Guy graduated with a 3.8, again, academic all Big Ten. Yards after the catch, out of the slot. He can return. He can run gadget plays. He's certainly a guy to watch in the third or fourth round. The Lions don't have a fourth-round pick right now. Don't be married to those draft numbers that are there right now. We know Brad Holmes will move around and find guys that he wants. If you want to go a little bit later, I'll go with another wide receiver, Ryan Flournoy from Southeast Missouri State. They met with him in Mobile. He played pretty well down there. They met with him in Indianapolis. He showed out pretty well. He's got some interesting tape. He needs some development. This is a guy that's sort of like Antoine Green was last year we're going to take him this year, probably redshirt him athletically on the practice squad, and then see what we've got. By the way, don't sleep on Antoine Green. There's some work going on with the big guy from North Carolina. You could see him step up maybe into a bigger role. He will certainly get that opportunity this year.
Boy, that would be sensational. Or, re-sign Josh Reynolds. I'd love to see him come back and get a big catch early in the season and put everything that happened in the NFC Championship game to bed, because I love me some Josh Reynolds.
I do too, but it's one of those things where, like, is he always going to be remembered? You're old enough to remember this, and I don't mean to chastise your age there, but you remember Jackie Smith in Dallas. He had to leave. Like, he just couldn't stay there after dropping that pass that lost them the Super Bowl. If Josh Reynolds catches either of the passes that he dropped in that NFC Championship game, the Detroit Lions are in the Super Bowl. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. They win that game. If he catches either of those passes,